one of the things that I often hear when we start getting into the weeds of using the tool, and as I've been talking to, more and more creatives and professionals over the last few weeks, is there is we'll say a limited understanding of what a prompt actually is and what we're asking for when we prompt the model. Um, some examples that I have seen where people clearly don't understand how it all works. People will prompt like they're talking to ChatGPT. Basically, I'm going to talk conversationally to you and hope you understand what I'm doing. So remove the background, or update X to Y, which there are technologies that do that, and you can ask for that type of stuff, for example, in ChatGPT. But when you're using a tool like Invoke, we are passing the prompt directly to the model. We are taking the words that you pass in, hitting the model with the effectively like that raw text string, and going through a process called diffusion in order to generate the resulting image. Now, over time, we're going to see models get better and better. So this is kind of a technical or like jargony type term called prompt adherence that is referred to in using these tools. And prompt adherence basically just means if I tell you the cat is on the fire hydrant's blue, the cat is a tabby cat, whatever, everything is where it should be. And it is kind of like aligned with the prompt that I put in. The current state of the art open models, SDXL, do okay at adhering to prompts, but they're not as good as kind of what's coming around the corner. But all of that is still going to have this underlying assumption of like, what are we actually getting when we prompt the model? So today we're going to focus on prompt design, prompt structure. I'll be looking for some like feedback from folks who are in the audience on what people are struggling with and where we can help. But we'll talk about not just prompts, but also embeddings. And embeddings are probably one of the more underutilized tools in a creative's toolkit in kind of the current day and age. We'll explain a little bit about what an embedding is, and then we'll kind of play around with designing a prompt. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to just put together a basic prompt. Now, we do have a GPT. If you all are ChatGPT users, we've got one that we created and published called Tag Weaver. This is kind of my like shortcut for generating a quick idea of a couple of interesting words. And so in this case, I will say create a prompt for let's have the audience give us some feedback here. What should we ask Tag Weaver for a prompt of? This can be like thematic. This can be specific subject. We can focus on concept art or pretty much anything. We'll see what we get from Tag Weaver. I see some typing happening, so I'll wait for that to happen and we'll see what we get. Prompts. Okay, create a prompt for what type of prop? An item. We'll do like prompt for a potion, magical potion. Tag Weaver has this kind of like structure where it'll go in and give a creative aim, and then it'll give you kind of your tag prompt. And it gives sometimes, a very long prompt that we can kind of like pick and choose what we want to. I see what's happening here. People are asking, do you want to share your screen? And the answer is yes. We haven't really started doing anything in Invoke yet, but we'll share the screen because now is a good time to do it. Basically, I've loaded up Tag Weaver in ChatGPT. You can use really any GPT model. You can run a lot of these locally as well. And so there's a lot of tools out there for getting ideas for prompts and kind of like playing around with language and understanding what we can add. In this case, I just asked for a magical potion, and I've got this long prompt here, all which I'm not going to use all of it. Basically, we'll kind of walk through what it all does, and maybe kind of explore that a little bit. But I'm going to take it, I'm going to paste it in. I'll do my generic negative prompt. And so just again, kind of giving some context for positive and negative prompts. Positive prompts are biasing the image towards the words that you use in the positive prompt. If you use prompt syntax like the plus or minus sign on certain words, you're essentially creating more bias towards that concept. You can almost think of this like we're taking a bunch of ingredients. Those ingredients are the words, and we're putting it in a stew. And the AI is figuring out how to like use all of that to make an image. Negative prompts are in technical terminology called unconditioning. And what that means is we are trying to bias away from those concepts. These are, it is not so perfect as to say like we won't see that at all. Because sometimes people will find that like a negative prompt is not perfectly removing some concept. But the way to think about it is we're pulling it away from those concepts. We're trying to kind of like steer it away from anything that's in the negative prompt. So I often use just like generic categories of bad quality images. And it's useful to think about like the terminology that's passed into the training data set. So in this case, I think a pretty basic one. We'll look at the full prompt here. I like this basic idea, enchanted elixir in a crystal vial. So we like that. Nestled within an ancient spellbook, we're going to take that out. Alchemical symbols glowing with an ethereal light, intricate glasswork with swirling iridescent liquid. I'm just going to leave it at that. We'll leave it at that for now, right? And for the purposes of testing, we're going to use a fixed seed. And I'll manually type this in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the magic seed. And what that means is we're going to be able to test every change that we make, see what it does to this image, and we'll be able to play around with it a little bit. One thing that I always like to include, and maybe I'll just show you what this generates without doing that, and maybe I'll even take away the negative so we can see what the negative prompt does. I often like to see how this either matches or does not match my expectations. So right now we're generating with without a negative prompt, and then we'll add in and generate with a negative prompt, just to kind of compare the two. Okay, so we've got this cool looking thing. I'm going to turn off the progress image so that I can take a look at this without being distracted by the generation that's coming after it. It's going through the VAE. All right, so we've got this kind of like almost photorealistic looking glass bottle. It is not really an elixir. It's definitely like been crystallized by the alchemical symbol. It's like, it's gotten a little too crystallized. Take a look at so when I use the negative prompt versus the full prompt, you can see a little bit of, it certainly impacts the image. I would say and it probably improves the quality of some of this piece. It adds a little bit of depth. It's not, I would say, too critical in this case. One of the main reasons why is we're not really pulling it towards any specific style. And so in this case, I want to do a bold ink watercolor concept art. We'll kind of add that in. And so now we're kind of like iteratively seeing what each of these prompt terms adds into our image. And we'll generate that, and it should kind of get pushed a lot more towards that style. Turn the prompt preview on. Yeah, so now we've actually got an anchor to move towards, since we're moving away from sketch and photo. And I don't want to get like too mathematical here, but a lot of what is happening under the hood here is just math. It's very like mathematical. And so if you think about like a map, we're going on a journey, we're on an adventure. It is useful to say where we're going and where we're not trying to go, right? So if we're trying to go through to the, XYZ kingdom, we don't want to go through the forbidden forest, right? So like we're kind of charting our course using the prompt. In this case, if we don't have a style, we don't have like a medium, it's not a photograph, it's not a sketch, we're kind of just relying on it guessing correctly, and it will guess. It will kind of just like find something to generate. Even if we've told it where not to go, it doesn't know where it's going. So we kind of want both of those things. We want kind of an anchor for the style, the medium that we're generating in, and we want to say what we're not trying to do. And that's really the purpose of the positive and negative conditioning in that context. So, and now we've got this kind of like much more like watercolory looking thing. Maybe we like this, maybe we don't. I'll put painterly concept art, bolding painterly concept art, and see what we get. And maybe that's going to be a little bit better of a style for what we're going for. We did get more of the elixir here. Okay, yeah, I think we're seeing what we got. We're going for the right style, or at least my preferred style. Obviously, we can do a lot of photorealism if we wanted. Yeah, still a little bit photorealistic, so we might up painterly, concept art, brush strokes. We might even do like digital oil painting. And again, this is all a fixed seed, so we are iterating and kind of toying around with, a lot of these words to kind of push it in that right direction. I think we're getting closer and closer to where we want to be. In this case, I find that this alchemical symbol is definitely kind of changing this elixir into something I don't want it to be. So we're going to take that out and regenerate. And that should, should push it in the right direction. We might need to say, filled with a liquid. Filled with a glowing liquid. Ethereal light. Although this is cool, it's nice. We just kind of want to keep pushing this in the right direction. Okay, so we're kind of like iteratively focusing on getting that. Once we have that prompt and style ironed out, we can kind of reuse it. In this case, we're kind of fighting with this one element in the middle. Although it is cool, we might try increasing some of these concepts. So, oh yeah, we do have liquid there. Someone called that out. So we'll do increase elixir, and we'll do increase on the liquid. And again, kind of prompt up weighting and down weighting. It's plus on the end, minus on the end, or any number of pluses or minuses. You don't want to go too hard. And you can also put them in parentheses and kind of use that as another way of controlling it. Somebody's asking about the shape and why it's the same. Is it doing this because the seed is fixed? And the answer is yes, partially. There's like a dynamic here where if you think about the process that's happening, we're taking an image, we're taking the noise, and we are progressively iterating over that noise towards this kind of final output. And every step of that process is the machine learning model saying, okay, here's the picture of noise, here's the prompt I have or the conditioning I have. How do I make this one step closer to matching the prompt or matching the conditioning? If the noise has a like structure in it, which is obviously happening here, this like shape in the middle is definitely in the noise, shuffling the seed can help. So we'll shuffle the seed just to kind of like explore the same prompt, different seed, and we'll see what we get. Now, it could be that this solves the problem entirely, but I think something in our prompt is very much kind of like pushing it towards this like crystallized structure inside of this, which looks cool, but isn't really what we're going for, right? So we'll do chant elixir potion in a crystal vial, and maybe we'll even take away the word crystal, because crystal might be like crystallizing this. So it wasn't just the seed, obviously, because we're still getting this kind of like crystallized structure in it. And that kind of tells us it's something in the prompt. The swirling piece might be doing it as well. So we're still seeing this kind of like swirling element. Take that out. Anything that's related to like the glass work or giving it kind of like a hard structure. Because what we're really looking for is kind of like just the potion. It is cool. I know people are saying that it looks cool. It does look cool, but again, this is like going back to how do we get what we are really looking for out of this. And obviously we could take this into the canvas and draw kind of like the hard lines. It's not really what we're going for though. So let's see, what else do we have? Glowing liquid ethereal lighter. Let's just try enchanted potion. We won't even do the vial. Glowing liquid, ethereal light. Oh, somebody said it. Maybe it's the ink. Could be. We'll try it without the bold ink. And that is, I mean, again, this goes back to like you're biasing it towards certain words, right? And so you're kind of like pulling this out. This is one of the reasons why using control nets is like so powerful, is because you don't have to fight structure, right? You can just say like, look, this is what I want, right? And we could certainly kind of take one of these out and pass that in as a control net, but that's not the purpose of today's video, so we won't do that. We're definitely getting this kind of like splashy thing, and so we might take out liquid because the liquid might be the splashing piece. Now I know that we've got liquid over here. So we'll just do enchanted potion, glowing ethereal light, iridescent. Yeah, I'm gonna try clearing the hue here and trying it without any of the liquids at all. Again, it's part of the fun of crafting a prompt. It's figuring out how to get that exactly the way you want it. All right, let's try this. Just because I'm taking this hard challenge here, and I really want to do this. We'll do enchanted potion. See what we've got. Yeah, so somebody's calling out like this could be just part of the training data. Like it might need to see more potions. Yeah. Just looking at what we're getting with just enchanted potion, there's this element here that is just like sitting inside of it. It could be even enchanted. We do potion. We'll say oozy green potion. Let's see what we get. This one's still the enchanted piece, I think, but we're starting to move towards our like focus area, and we're seeing what words actually pushed it to have that structure that we didn't want. The ooze is out of the bottle in that one, which is funny. So I think this one was actually pretty good. It's just potion, no enchanted. So if we look back through and we kind of like look at the words that drove that, we took out a lot of the structure and eventually just got to kind of like our potion. And I think this again goes back to, if you have intent with the word, recognize that sometimes the system's not going to understand your intent. And this is, this is a lot of ways to say, this is why training a model so that your language actually matches what you're intending is so powerful. Because, I was talking to someone on the team earlier today. All of what is happening in this space is creating an average interpretation of a word, right? It doesn't matter how much data you have, it is still getting kind of like the average across all of those instances. And that average may be different than your intent. Very often when we have creative intent, like oozy in my mind has a very specific like definition. This is what I mean by oozy. And so we'll talk about kind of as the second part of this today, embeddings. So, and I think this is like a good demonstration of why embeddings are useful. When I train an embedding, what I am doing is I am really kind of codifying a word to mean something. And the technique is commonly referred to as a textual inversion in the image generation space. And basically, the process for training a textual inversion embedding is I'm going to pass 30, 20 images, 4 images. I'm going to pass those images in, and I'm going to kind of create a code word for that concept. I'm basically trying to teach it. When I tell you X, generate this. And so I've got an example here that I've trained. I'll use it just to kind of demonstrate ways that you can use this. I've trained an embedding called Pro Photo. I've used this in the past, I think, in an example or two to generate like a photograph. So I'm going to do a green potion Pro Photo 2. I'm not doing any of like the prompt terminology to describe a photo or anything like that. I've already trained kind of the concept of what a Pro Photo should look like, and I'm going to generate for that. And we'll kind of talk about how I can use embeddings both in the positive prompt and the negative prompt. And we'll talk about a technique called pivotal tuning, which is super cool as well, which uses both embeddings and LoRAs. Okay, so I've got a green potion Pro Photo 2. This is my Pro Photo of a green potion. It works, right? Let's try our previous prompt here, one of these, maybe this one. Try that out. Actually, no, we won't do that. Right. Maybe our original prompt. These back here. Give this a shot. I know it's not gonna be like our potion or whatever, but we can still see what it looks like when we do a Pro Photo 2. And I will also call out that I am on the pre-release version of 4.0. So that'll be coming out soon. And you can try that out. You'll see a couple of things that are a little bit different in the UI around embeddings and the ability to customize models with trigger phrases, which I'll show in a little bit. So we've got kind of our Pro Photo of this potion that we had before. So this is when we had kind of like the painterly style, we got that. When we used Pro Photo style, we got this. And that's kind of like a cool, interesting thing. Now, I can also use it as a negative prompt. And that will push it away from the concept of Pro Photo 2, right? And so there are concepts of negative embeddings as well. And you can create negative embeddings of anything. And a lot of what you'll find that kind of like help increase quality is, again, pushing away from lower quality images that you don't want to see and pushing more towards things that you do want to see. So you can create positive and negative embeddings. In this case, I'm going to use Pro Photo 2 as a negative. And maybe what I'll do is I'll go back to one of the images that we generated before. I'll maybe take this one because it's particularly like painterly. I'm going to use all. So this is everything that I used to generate it. If I hit the generate button, it would generate this exact same image. But instead of just photo, I'm going to use Pro Photo 2 as a negative embedding, and I'm going to upweight that. So the only thing I've done is added my Pro Photo embedding as a negative. I'm increasing the weight of that. And it's not going to dramatically change the image. It's not going to be like a completely different image, but it will push it pretty hard away from that concept of a photo and maybe help increase the quality. So in this case, we can kind of see the difference here. It's a little bit simpler, and we've kind of like pushed it more towards this complex, kind of interesting thing inside of the image. But a lot of the core elements are the same. It's really just helped refine things a little bit. Now, this is where you can also use, and I trained this as a pivotal tuned embedding. And you guys are going to have to keep me honest here. If I'm starting to get a little too technical, bring me back down to earth. I want this to be interactive and educational. I don't want to like go way above your head. When we train models, we have kind of like multiple options of training. We can train the actual underlying content. So it learns something new. And that's what a LoRA is, or what concepts are, is we're training new concepts into the core understanding of the model. This is useful when we have something it has never seen anything like it before. We need to give it, a new understanding. We need to teach it something completely new. That's where a LoRA is really helpful, is because you can kind of inject that into the AI model. An embedding is useful for referencing stuff that it's probably has seen. It probably knows what it is. It just may not have a really, really concise way of having us articulate that to the model. So in this case, it's seen, photographs. It's seen professional photography, so it knows what that is. I've got kind of an embedding, so it's useful. It can kind of say, okay, that's what you're looking to do something different for. What pivotal tuning does is we are training a LoRA on content, and we're at the same time training an embedding to reference that new content. So we don't have to use existing words. We actually have this like very, very tightly coupled. I've created a bunch of new content, and I'm giving you a very articulated way of referencing that. Now, in this case, ProPhoto works on its own because it's just a generic kind of concept, but I also trained a ProPhoto LoRA. And so, took a bunch of commercial commons images of professional photography, trained that both as a LoRA and as a textual inversion. The Invoke training script has a pivotal tuning mode and basically does this for you if you're interested in doing it. But now I have a LoRA and an embedding that matches to that LoRA. So now we can actually see what happens when I use the LoRA as well on top of this. So we're going to take this same image that we generated. And again, this is without any embedding. This is with the embedding in the negative. And now I'm going to add the LoRA that kind of like amps up its understanding of what ProPhoto 2 is. Now I'll also probably push this up into the positive prompt just so that we can see what that looks like as well. But you start to see that like there's a lot of articulation here in how we're creating this. And once we have a really good style and a way of creating something that's like powerful, we can reuse that, right? We can save that into a workflow and have that baked into a process. So we've got, this is our ProPhoto LoRA amped up. This is just with the embedding, and then this is without the negative at all. So we're kind of increasingly pushing it more towards a certain style as we move away from this and into this. Now let's take ProPhoto 2 and push this up here. So we're taking out all the style stuff. For the sake of just like cleanliness, we'll take out the negative prompt, and we'll see what happens when we get an enchanted potion in ProPhoto style. So now we've added that to the positive prompt. So we can really compare like mathematically when we move this one word around, or this one like embedding around so that it understands it in different contexts, we can see like, where is it the same? Where is the subject matter the same? And what's different by moving this around? So now we've got this same thing that we were generating before, a lot of the same concepts. So the vial of the potion, we've got this kind of like green thing coming in from Enchanted. We found that Enchanted was kind of doing this like, glowing object. And probably the reason for that is when you look at like an enchanted forest or an enchanted anything, there's like these like glowing things around it. So that's probably why Enchanted does that. We take away Enchanted and just do Potion ProPhoto 2. We'll probably get rid of this object in the middle. We'll see what we end up landing on overall. So it becomes a lot skinnier. We actually still have this subject, this like thing in the middle, which is interesting. But we kind of are able to see what the different words change in that process. So questions from people, does that all track? Does it all make sense? I think this is like most useful when we're trying to see like, does that understanding or does that definition of how we're describing it make sense to people who are creating with this stuff? So I'll kind of open the floor for confirmation that it all makes sense or questions on whether that is a little bit unclear still. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the upcoming features that make this all really usable and kind of reusable in a lot of ways. Someone's commenting their understanding the embedding is like a subtle change to the generation. Not necessarily. An embedding is basically the same thing as any other token or phrase. It is augmenting the model or the generation and pulling out or invoking something different from the model. It's basically, if you think about what's happening under the hood here, I described it as math earlier, right? Anytime we put a prompt in, that prompt is getting turned into a math language, okay? And that is conditioning, or the tensors are called the conditioning tensors, right? So that math is not something we understand. We don't understand that math, but the machine learning system does. That math can be composed or created through words. And so that has effectively been how all of the words that we use in a prompts are being translated. It's being translated to math. Or using the embedding process, we are training the system such that when we use a specific phrase like this Photo 2 in the carrots, it generates a very specific mathematical output. And that has basically been honed and trained on what we want that to mean. We're tuning that embedding to mean something we want it to mean. And that is what an embedding is. It's just like any other prompt that we use. It's getting turned into math, but we have created our own word. That's kind of the way to think about what an embedding is. Someone asked about the concept of trigger phrases. And maybe this is a cool moment to showcase some of what 4.0 has as far as updates that are coming down the pipeline. So we'll take maybe the prompt from this. Bold ink, painterly concept art, brush strokes, digital oil painting. And what I mean by trigger phrases are in 4.0, we have a new model manager. We kind of talked about this and shared a lot of kind of upcoming stuff. This model manager is for the local community edition. We have kind of more features for the enterprise if you're sharing models with teams and kind of doing all this stuff and managing this at scale. There's another level of model management that sits above this in the enterprise version, but this is the commercial, this is the community edition, excuse me. And the community edition has new features called default settings and trigger phrases. Default settings let you set defaults for each model that you're using. So you can have VAE, always loadable, scheduler, steps, basically all the advanced stuff that you typically need to set on a per model basis. You can set that ahead of time and then just hit one button, have all of those set anytime you switch models. But we can also tie certain trigger phrases to a model. So if I've trained a LoRA to use a specific phrase, or if I've trained a model to use a specific phrase, I can put that in as a trigger phrase. And so then I don't have to remember, what was this model trained on? How did this model get trained? That is all handled here. We can also use it to save prompts that we like to use with that model. And so in this case, I'm just going to show an example of, I can save this bold ink painterly concept art as a trigger phrase. And then I can reuse that really easily from that embeddings menu inside of the app. So let's say I'm starting from scratch, right? And I'm like, oh, I've saved that style. That's my go-to style with this model. Now I can say I want, what's another prop? Let's say somebody's typing, so I'll let them give me the prop that we're gonna use. A sniper rifle. Okay, this will be fun. Sniper rifle. Oh wait, I don't want to copy paste that. I'm going to show the trigger phrase. So I use my embeddings hotkey, which is that left caret. And now inside of this list, I can see my trigger phrases as well. So I've basically added a shortcut for certain elements of my prompt fragments that I can use. And these can be long or short. right? And now I can kind of reuse these. So I'm just going to reuse that, right? And now we've got our, I'm using my actually ProPhoto LoRA, which I don't need for this. And we'll generate our sniper rifle, bolding, painterly concept art. Now, sniper rifles and any kind of like, video game props or content, what you'll typically find, although this is doing a pretty good job, what you'll typically find is that most of the time, if you're a studio that's working with any type of equipment, drones, sniper rifles, helicopters, yada, 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 you're going to want to train a LoRA on each model, like each specific type of weapon. So like, let's say Halo, for example, you've got like plasma swords. You don't want to just prompt for plasma swords. You want that plasma sword. And I'm probably butchering it. It's probably not plasma sword. I haven't played Halo in a long time. But, you've got that kind of like big, very specifically shaped. Everyone knows what it's supposed to look like. That is what you want. You train a LoRA on that, a pivotally tuned LoRA maybe, so that you've got the embedding for it. And now you can really prompt for that one thing that you want to use. And this is where the technology gets really, really interesting, because as a creative, you're very often looking for that type of control. I don't just want any sniper rifle. I want this model sniper rifle. I want this, right? And while this is okay, I think anyone who's familiar with like the process of making stuff for games, they would look at this and say, there's a lot that's wrong with it, right? For at least for what I want. Like maybe this strange barrel thing isn't right, or like the scope that's on the sniper rifle is way too big and we would want it to look a little bit different, right? So there's like a lot of things that when you train a LoRA or an embedding, it can really tightly understand that concept and help you improve that. I think the purpose here was just to show that now we've got like a really reusable style that transfers really well. And I think that worked. But obviously, we can play around with and say, like a mid-century modern chair. We're doing all kinds of props. Prompts for props. Maybe that's like the catchy clickbait title for this one. That's the title, prompts for props. Now this is where I think things get really interesting. We have a mid-century modern chair and we have this style. Why does this look so realistic, right? This is a lot more realistic than this, right? And I think this is where, again, it's all math. Mid-century modern chairs are very heavily skewed or biased towards photos of furniture, right? Mid-century modern chairs look like this. They look like photos, right? So while we do have the concepts translating here of like, artwork and kind of bold ink and stuff like that, this is very heavily skewed towards kind of photograph. And so we've got that photograph piece in it. Now we can do a couple things. We can increase the weight of our negatives. We can add in things like our ProPhoto 2. We can add our ProPhoto LoRA. And so we're kind of boosting the understanding of professional photo and negatively weighting for it. And we can go in and group our prompt together and upweight for digital oil painting, right? All of those things, we've got a fixed seed, should push it further and further away from that like core understanding of mid-century modern chairs are photographs, and push that more towards like we're really looking for a painterly style of this. Still maybe this is like the struggle bus of prompt adherence, right? Closer, but I still think it's a little too realistic for my taste. I mean, you can kind of look at it and see that there's like some brush strokes, but it's not really the same style that we're looking for or thinking about. So we've got some time. We'll hack on this, because I think this is like the interesting piece of why do things turn out the way they're turning out? Why are they looking a little bit less like what I prompted for and more like X, Y, or Z? It all comes back to understanding how to craft this in a reusable way that's generalizable, right? Getting your prompt in place to kind of expand that capability set. Somebody asked the question, are there any plans to add internal or external tools to train TIs, LoRa's, and Invoke? There already are. We have open source scripts for training and a training UI in the Invoke training repo of GitHub, which somebody has just linked in the chat and which we'll try to reference in the description for the video. It is kind of early beta of that, and so definitely taking feedback on both the UI as well as if you run into anything. There's a lot of code in there for training stuff. We do everything from textual inversions to LoRa's to pivotal tuned LoRa's. There's also some kind of like future work that we've got planned for DPO LoRa training. But all of that is in the Invoke training repo. That one's going to be a little bit more technical to pull down, and is a little bit more of like a bare bones beta UI, but it's definitely usable. We'll be covering some of the training materials and content in a video in the next week or so. We've been wrapping up our 4.0 release, and then Ryan, who is our machine learning engineer, will kind of sit on a call with me, and we'll kind of go through the training repo and kind of explain how to use it, what it's for, and all of these pieces. This is a good kind of like precursor to that video, because now we understand a little bit more about like what is embedding, what is an embedding, what is LoRa, and a lot of the fun stuff there. But let's get back to this, because while I am sure everyone loves hearing me talk, it's a lot cooler to see pictures get generated. So we've got a mid-century modern chair. If I take mid-century modern out, I probably will get more of the style. So again, this goes back to like what is pushing it, what is biasing it towards this notion of like realistic. And I have to imagine it's a mid-century modern chair. Because if we just do a chair, this is another interesting one. What types of chairs often are painted, right? Like what do we have more examples of when it comes to chairs that are painted? Typically older chairs, right? Especially if we're talking about like oil paintings, right? And this all goes back to the kind of like mathematical undertones of all of this, which is we are pushing things more or less towards things that exist in the world, things that are out there in culture. And so, if we want to show it more examples of mid-century modern chairs that have been painted and then train that into a LoRa, now we actually have a better understanding of what a mid-century modern chair might look like in a LoRa. And somebody is calling out one of our folks that works in architecture, which, if you're in architecture, mid-century modern is like, I think you definitely understand mid-century modern, because there's a lot of mid-century modern architecture that's really, really like profoundly beautiful, I think. But mid-century modern furniture, this is what he says, was in a time period when we became fascinated with the camera and photography was more accessible, right? So like, again, this all comes back to how are these concepts linked together and how do we articulate what we're looking for? So in this case, what we might do is we might take this to image, right? So we've got the shape of the mid-century modern chair, and now we just want to really push it more towards this style. And we could throw in a control net if we wanted to, but we'll see what we get with just an image. Chair, bold ink, painterly concept art. So now we've got the structure of the mid-century modern chair, but now we're pushing it kind of more towards kind of the art style that we want. What we may find is, it's pushing it a little bit. We might increase our denoising strength. And if the structure gets too lost, then we'll have to use a control net. I think we're keeping the structure mostly. But even in the shape and structure, it's still biased more towards this kind of like concept of, it still looks a little photography to me. And maybe that will always be the case. I mean, this plant is starting to look a little painted. So, I mean, this is definitely looking more painted than photographic. I guess I maybe take that back when you scale it up. But there are some elements here that are, you know, uh, the shadows and the corners of the room look a little bit too real, a little bit too well structured for me to like lose that perception of this is a painting. But I can look at this and see that there's a lot of the kind of telltale signs of a painting with like brush strokes and stuff like that. So that might work. We might try this a different way as well. So I'll do a canny of this, and we'll use canny model. That works. And we'll just do a general, like no image to image. We'll just use the canny map, and we'll kind of see how all of these things work together. I think this is a really really powerful way of exploring how all of this stuff is connected and how it's like you're kind of teasing apart this to get the things that you want. Someone asked, oh, let's see, we got a couple comments here. The connection between photography and mid-century modern exposes one of the subtle biases in our visual culture. I think that's like super fascinating. I agree. This is like one very fascinating thing about machine learning is that you're effectively speaking to culture in some ways, especially with these like general trained models and the openly licensed stuff. You're kind of speaking to the collective culture. It exposes a lot of biases, right? And I think you've seen this in the news recently with Gemini. They actively tried to fight against those biases, and ended up showing like it's really hard to or disconnect the biases from the underlying history and culture of everything. Someone else asked about painting a trained or training a painting LoRA. Would that come in to help? Yes. A painting style LoRA will fundamentally, like if you think about what a LoRA does, it is taking the base model and it's really injecting like the more recent training into that model. So if you train it on a bunch of painting or a bunch of painting style outputs, the most recent training that a model undergoes is very often the most impactful. It has the biggest impact on the general understanding. If you went through and took a general model and then trained it only on paintings, but you didn't use the term painting, you just trained it on like, this is a cat, this is a dog, this is a chair, but all of them happen to be paintings, its world model, like the way it understands reality, would be entirely modified to be painting. Like I live in a painting world, right? And I think this is kind of like one of those interesting pieces, and maybe getting too philosophical here, but I find it super fascinating. I love to talk about this stuff. When you have a world model, or when you think about a machine learning model, it is like a child, and it is only exposed to what you train it on, right? And so if you only train it on paintings, it thinks it lives in a world of painting, right? It's like, this is my world, this is the world that I live in, I've only ever seen paintings, and that's all I can understand. And so that's kind of like, again, how when we think about using these models, the most powerful, the most probably ethical way of using these general open models is by using LoRAs trained on your work, your openly licensed stuff, Creative Commons things that like are generally usable, because that's going to kind of inject a lot of the most recent training into the core style, and then allow you to kind of have the broader understanding of the world, right? What is a chair, what is a animals, what are dragons, things like that. But you have the more kind of like style oriented stuff overlaid on top of it with the LoRA. Somebody asked about user interfaces for the web. Definitely think like a more UI UX focused LoRA would be better there. So optimizing the image generation model to generate specifically images of images of UIs. There are some that have been trained, and it's basically just people go on the internet and like take pictures of websites and say this is UI UX. But if you were a UI UX designer and you had, a Behance portfolio, you could train it on your UI UX style, and you could give it the language of, this is my button component, this is my XYZ component, and it would start to understand how things are laid out and composed. Almost even use like atomic design for the UI UX piece for that. That is a really cool way of using this stuff. I do think that it's probably worth calling out as well that there are like models that have been trained on completely different problem spaces, right? This is one of the powers of the image generation space, and why Invoke is like a really powerful tool, because it's very generalizable. Back in, I think it was 2023, early 2023, maybe, might have been late 2022, there was a team called Refusion. And what they did was they took the stable diffusion model and they trained it on pictures of sound, pictures of music. And with enough of those pictures generated, basically it's like the sound waves, right? They were able to generate pictures of the sound and then play it back, and it would make sound, it would make music, right? So it's like these models can generate any visual media, anything that you want to tune it to generate that thing. It all comes back down to training it into the model, training to understand what you want to use. And that is kind of the power of this piece. So I'll get back to generating some pictures here, because I know I've been talking for a little bit. We got a couple minutes left. Somebody has said that they have a couple of ideas for that they want to try, which is using negative photography prompts. So we'll say, I'll copy out some of the things that they used. Let's do mid-century modern chair. And we're going to add in depth of field, soft light, exposure. We'll even do something like taken on a Nikon camera. Just stuff that'll push it away from photography. And he's saying, don't blame him if it doesn't work. No, I think it's a good idea. It's a good idea. So we've got our fixed seed, all that stuff. Maybe just to do a direct comparison back to our original chair. I think this was our original chair. We'll use this prompt, and then I'll add this negative one in, and we'll generate that. People being super kind in the chat. Love that. Yeah, I think we're still going to see this pushes it much more towards the like photograph style, even with those negative prompts. Now, what we could do is thinking about some ways we could play around with this. So we got mid-century modern, pushing it more towards photography. We can try downweighting mid-century modern. So I'm going to downweight it by 2. And this is maybe a good explanation of downweighting. Downweighting is kind of, I like to think about it like when you're playing ping pong or tennis or pickleball. You see these like pros, they kind of do this. They hit the ball with just a little bit of curve, and it kind of like spins around. They got this like technique. That's my mental model of downweighting. You are still incorporating the prompt into your prompt. It's still a positive prompt, but you're kind of downweighting it. You're kind of giving it like a lower curve, if you will. So you're like influencing it, but you're like not too much, right? But not too much. The negative prompt is obviously like remove this, but if it's in the positive prompt, you're adding it in. And so we'll try it with like negative just to see what we get. And again, it kind of goes back to, yes, someone said 1 teaspoon instead of 1 tablespoon. There's another ingredient reference. It's not going to fix everything, because it's still, as you can see, is still mid-century modern, but it is a lot more painterly. Like you see much more of the painterly type of look in this photo than in the photographed version, right? And so again, this kind of like, it's a good way to finesse things the way you want it to be. The other thing that we can do, CFG scale, we had a video, I think, on YouTube of prompting tools, right? And the CFG scale is CFG scale is kind of like how strictly it adheres to our prompt. Right now, it is at a 5, which is like, I would say not on the super low end, but it's definitely lower than we can go. We could bump this up to an 8.5. And I'll even, we'll leave the minus there and we'll see what we get. So I'm increasing the strictness of my prompt. You must adhere to my positive prompt. And we're going to be able to compare this with the before and after of increasing this. Again, there's a lot of like tools here. See, it's like very strict. That's a painting. That ain't a photo. And we can kind of like tune it that way as well. So we've got all of these ways of tailoring the prompt and controlling the strength to get to the place we want it to get to. And this is why it's super helpful when you have found the right mix. And somebody said this looks a little overcooked. I agree. That's why I typically go a little bit lower. So we can do 7, for example, and see what that looks like. Once you've found the right mix, you can bake this into a workflow for a specific job to be done for you. And then you don't have to worry about it, right? Like you don't have to think about like fiddling with all these knobs and levers. You've got a much more controlled tool. So the lower we go on CFG scale, the more liberal it's going to take our prompt. If we go down to 3.5, it's kind of like going to wander off on its own a little bit. We're starting to lose that shape a little bit with 3.5. It's in share. Yeah, somebody called out that like oil painting has some bleeding into the wall in some of these. And again, I think that's like there's a lot of comments in chat that are funny. Yes. So we may release this with 4.0 as a beta backend feature in workflows. This might come out in 4.1. We are working on regional prompting. And what that'll allow for is very targeted. This is where I want this in my image. And you'll be able to use that through an interface and have very specific control. Regional prompting is very, very exciting for compositional control. I know a lot of people are now like saying we're excited. Yeah, it's going to be super cool. Let's see. Yeah, I think overall people have got a lot of good thoughts and feedback on like the prompting stuff. And we're kind of nearing the end of the hour, so we'll probably call it for today. But hopefully this was kind of like an educational exploration on how prompt terms influence kind of the math behind the scenes on all this stuff. Some of the techniques you can use, including training your own model, including kind of like going in and using some of the more advanced syntax and the advanced controls. This is intended to be an educational session in a lot of ways. So hopefully it was. I certainly feel like there were a lot of good examples of the pros and the cons. Prompts for props is, again, the title that we've decided to go with for the video, which will be great. Appreciate everyone joining. We'll see you guys next week for another one. It's been fun.